for the experience of what Vietnam would be like?
Well, they do in the sense that, again, the nickname for Viet Cong was Charlie, and it was all, if they're in black pajamas, they're Charlie. Well, that's not quite true. but they especially wore the black pajamas for the night and stuff. But, there's some beautiful colors, and some of the ladies' outfits, the ow dyes and stuff, are beautiful, and it's just that a majority of people wear black pajamas. So you're always on this trench where there's the hair on the back of your neck standing up all the time. And so that's kind of what it is. And, of course, in my case, it even got stranger. I went to Long Binh to await being picked up to my unit. And at that time, I was on orders to go to the 4th Infantry Division and play coup. And I sat there, and the trucks kept coming and taking all these people to the 4th Infantry Division, but they never would call my name. And after 2 days, all of a sudden, this Willie's Jeep drives up that's green and white, and it's the National Police vehicle, and they call my name and throw me in that Jeep, and off we go.
Go where?
And the next night, well... What I found out was they weren't telling us where we were going, and the reason was that I ended up going downtown into Saigon and taken to the Citadel there, which happened to be one of our nation's top intelligence secret training houses there. And I don't know how secret it was, but that's what, of course, what they told us.
Okay.
But so you went in there, and everything is super top secret, super this, super that. In one corner, over in the corner of the part where you drove in and there's a whole caged-in room back there, and there's a whole bunch of guys in black pajamas, unshaven. They're smoking French cigarettes and eating Nuc Mam and all of these Oriental foods. And the reason was those guys were in training to be the super long-range patrol guys that they were going to ship back in the backwoods. Well, if an American goes in and we got our nice fresh shaving cream and lotion and we're all of this, and we got our starch uniforms and we got all the stuff from our weapons and stuff and banging around, well, they know who you are. So they were training these guys to be covert operators that would go around in the back. Some would be snipers, some would be long-range patrol, and some were just going out to watch the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But in order to be there, you had to smell, think, and be everything like a Vietnamese.
Wow, yeah, go ahead.
That was a shock, because these were all Americans, by the way.
Okay. All Americans smoking the French cigarettes and being trained to actually... So it was a real cultural immersion that happened. It wasn't just assimilation, it was immersion.
No baths, no baths, no anything. Nothing U.S. or American at all. Total local. And the reason was it because of that. And of course, you go in there to the guys that are in charge of this thing, and they're, again, from a very super secret intelligence agency, and they're running around in Brick Brothers clothes and drinking Glenfiddich and putting a raw egg in it and milk in it. And that was the cool guys of the world were the operatives. And so when you're an 18-year-old or just 19-year-old kid, that's quite an experience.
I can imagine that it's quite an experience. So you serve your country. You're there in Vietnam. You've bravely served, and now it's time to come back home. It's time to come back to America. And you had mentioned to me that you arrived in San Francisco and that you were suffering with a little bit of post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're immersed back into this kind of ironic, hostile environment. How did you cope with that adjustment? How did you feel when you stepped off the airplane back onto our soil?
Well, I think that first there's a little preliminary. My job in Vietnam, I felt, was one of the most serious things that could have done the most good in Vietnam. And so I extended and stayed an extra 6 months there.
Wow.
So in a sense, instead of a 1-year tour, I ended up with actually 17 months and 20 days or something. But it meant that I was still feeling that I was there doing something that was useful, something that was maybe going to contribute. And of course, our philosophy at that time to all that we were fed was you had to stop the war in Vietnam because the communist dominoes were falling the way, and if you didn't stop there, then everything was lost. And so I always felt I was standing up for Mom and apple pie and America and proud. So it's a little bit of a shock when you land at Travis Air Force Base, and as you fly in, you see all these great big mobs of people outside the gate. And then when you actually get on the ground and come through it, it's all of the protesters, and they're spitting on you and telling you that you're baby killers and we're all druggers, and all of a sudden you almost wished you would have changed into civilian clothes going out the door so nobody knew you were military.
So instead of being proud like you were, you felt ashamed at some point.
Well, you felt, oh my God, what am I getting into? And I don't want to go out there and get spit on or beat or whatever. And so some of us stood our ground and did it anyway. But the problem just was that was the attitude of the country, and that was the way it was. And for a long time, it wasn't that you went to every bar and somebody bought you a drink or bought you a meal or did something. It was get out of uniform and don't let anybody know where you've been.
Wow,
you know,
that's amazing for the
so
service you did.
So it's a drastic change. And then the other thing you have to understand is that from our lowest privates and sergeants, some of them are dealing with multi-million-dollar equipment. All of a sudden, you've got a job, you've got a mission, you're saving somebody's life. The next guy, all of a sudden, you come back here, and you're worth being spit on and have to hide because you can't say any knowledge, or go try to get a job, and they won't recognize that you were just in charge of a $20 million airplane, and now you can't make a decision of the smallest order or throwing a hamburger or something without somebody telling you what to do. Think of the impact on that.
Yeah, it's really kind of opened my eyes to when people say they're suffering with PTSD or they're having trouble adjusting to being a civilian again. I've never heard it put quite like that, because I think people are still struggling with whatever's gone on, and maybe they don't feel comfortable always verbalizing that to a civilian like myself. So thank you, Fred, for everybody that's listening. Now you have a real glimpse into what it feels like to come back. I never, what you just said about the plane, being in charge of a $20 million plane, and then someone's micromanaging you about flipping a burger at a fast food place when you come home. That juxtaposition is insane to me. You know, like, I just was saving lives.
And that's the part that people don't understand, why there's so many pent-up anger and frustrations. Because all of a sudden you came from a place in the military that you had a voice that counted. And you could ground a pilot, you could ground a plane, you could ground everything based on your say-so as a maintenance sergeant or enlisted man. And it meant something because people believed it and trusted what you said and weren't going to risk lives over it. And now you can't even be trusted to put your wet leg in the pants first.
Oh gosh, you guys deserve so much more. Every veteran here deserves so much more than that. And listeners, the reason I wanted to give you a little bit of background here is because I just think it's really important that we realize that each of us, not just Mr. Fred today, but each of us are the sum of our experiences. And Fred's was first shown as the veterans, you know, when he got back and the veterans weren't regarded or treated with respect upon his arrival at home. And as I was ruminating over this, it occurred to me that this was one of the first bricks in the project that would eventually become his life's work. And I just wanted to know, Fred, what do you feel about that? And how did the Missing in America Project actually get started? Because to me, I'm making this connection of you not seeing respect happen after you've done this great service. And so I think that this is how I interpreted it, is that it kind of really resonated with you that we deserve better. And then you become more, and you are doing this project now. So how did that get started for you?
Brian, I look at your summation and what you felt, and I hadn't thought about that way either. But you're absolutely right, and it was a layer of the brick to say no veteran should be disrespected. And it doesn't matter whether you served in a Cold War or served in a real war, because the fact that you joined or drafted, and it doesn't matter, the drafted guys died and fought with me just as good as anybody else, and so it was no difference once you were there. And the point to it is they shouldn't be ignored or forgotten or
cast aside. Yeah.
Secret, and so I agree with you completely, but I hadn't really thought about that way. But meanwhile, a few years had passed where I was doing all kinds of different things, some nefarious things, some normal things. but I ended up in Oregon, and I was starting to look at things to join and belong to, because I think it's famous for most veterans, and especially Vietnam veterans. When we came back and you look at most of the veterans organizations, they mostly had all World War II or Korea volunteers. They had every senior position taken. They had some traditions and things that they did that have been wonderful for veterans for a lot of years. But us that were new veterans just couldn't quite grasp some of that formality that was different, because in Vietnam, it wasn't that strict in the sense that when you're out in the jungle for 3 weeks, 4 weeks and living out there and you're not coming back to civilization, there isn't a lot of strict structure. And when you got back to base camp, the worst person in the world was the old colonel or the old somebody that wanted all of the spit and polish in Vietnam when it was monsoon weather and raining. So you tended to not look to stuff that if it didn't have a good reason why, you didn't want to really join and do things. But after a few years, you realize that you have to pay back something, that you owed something, or we don't feel quite fulfilled with something. And so I started looking at things and organizations to do, and in doing that, I was in Oregon at the time. I started going to the Eagle Point Veteran Cemetery, and when I was there, I saw that once a month they were having a ceremony that were for homeless or indigent people. Okay. And so I went and attended one of these services, and they were burying 33 veterans, and there was absolutely no family there. There was absolutely nobody there but myself, one person from the cemetery, and a chaplain from White City. And so you looked at 33 veterans being buried and going on, and there wasn't a single thing or person to recall them except for me at the time. And it just said, oh my gosh. And so then I went back and I ended up calling about 9 states to VA cemeteries to see what they did. And lo and behold, I found that Nevada had just buried 34 soldiers that were unclaimed or indigent. I found that Idaho, and this is another story, because in Idaho I talked with the cemetery director, whose name was Rich Sessler, and Rich Sessler had actually started a program in Idaho that was called Missing in America. And so he and I partnered together that he was doing, and because he was a federal employee, he couldn't do anything nationally or outside of the VA rules.
Right.
So I incorporated and did everything to make it a nationwide organization. But by then I knew about Idaho, I knew about Nevada, and the Oregonian had just published a Pulitzer Prize-winning